Hello, grammar world. All right. This is a video that is about action verbs, and specifically it is about the two different types of action verbs, transitive and intransitive action verbs. They are determined by whether or not the action verb has a complement or not. So, the definition of a complement is a word, an object that completes the meaning of a verb. There is an entire separate video on verb complements: direct object, indirect object, predicate nominative, predicate adjective. They're very important, but what we're talking about today, action verbs. And so if you're looking at whether a verb is transitive or intransitive or not, you first have to figure out whether or not it is action or linking. None of these verbs are going to be linking verbs. So let's talk about what they are. Okay. An action verb. First, let's start with that. An action verb is a verb that expresses the action taken by the subject. So we're looking for whatever the subject is doing. And so that action is got to go somewhere. Is it going to be describing the subject, or is it going to be passed on to an object? And so what we're looking here is transitive and intransitive. So let's start with some definitions. Transitive verb. This is the one that directs its action towards that object, and that object is called a direct object. In Latin, transitive, this term here, means to cross or go over, right? To cross or go over, which means that the action is crossing over to an object. So you can ask who or what of the verb to find that object. And so we have I taught. I taught what? I taught the lesson. The lesson is the object that receives the action of teaching. That makes the lesson a direct object, and it makes taught a transitive verb. The students learned the lesson. Learned is the verb. Transmitting, and that's another way to think of it, is to think of an action verb, especially a transitive action verb, as a radio that is transmitting its action out and is being received by the listener, which happens to be the direct object. So that's another way of thinking about it. Sometimes it helps to put in context there. And so we have this object that is receiving the action of learning, and therefore that makes this a transitive verb. I taught the students the lesson. I taught. Now this is the tricky part here. Again, we're dealing with two complements. And so you have to ask, what did you teach? You taught the lesson. And a lot of people say, well, you taught the students too, but you taught the lesson to the students, making this the direct object and this the indirect object. You have to look at what object is receiving the action. Now, without the lesson, if that was not there, then the students would be receiving that action. But there is the lesson. That is the likely thing that is receiving the teaching there. So let's look at an intransitive verb. Now, intransitive action verb does not pass its action to an object. An in Latin means not. And so still has the transitive, which means to cross over. But with that in there, it does not cross over to an object. And you don't need that object, which is called the complement, to complete the meaning of the verb. So if we had the verb I laughed, you do not need an object to complete that meaning. I laughed. You don't need an object to understand what I'm talking about. I laughed loudly. Now, loudly is not an object. It's an adverb. And an adverb cannot be the object of a verb, mainly because it's not a noun. And so that, again, that verb does not have an object it's going to, making it an intransitive verb. I laughed with the students. Now, here is an object. So a lot of people might assume that that's receiving the action. It's not. You can't laugh the students. When you have a phrase, you can cross it out. A phrase cannot equal object, right? It will not be an object. It might describe the verb in some way, it might interact with the verb in some way, but it cannot receive the action of a verb. So that makes this intransitive. And so I often tell my students, hey, when you're trying to figure out whether or not a verb is linking or action, or whether it's transitive or intransitive, one helpful step is to go through the entire sentence and cross out all the prepositional phrases. You'd be amazed at how quickly the verb emerges. It takes away all the extraneous words there. So let's look at some action verbs here. Derek greeted. There's the verb greeted what? The visitors, making that a transitive verb. The train stopped. Stopped what? We have no idea. Stopped a bullet, stopped a cow. We don't know. So that's an intransitive verb. We ate on the patio. Remember, we did not eat the patio. That is not what we ate. And so, again, we have a prepositional phrase here. We can just cross that out. We ate. We don't know what we ate. There is no object. So it's an intransitive verb. Moving on. Now, this, I want to show you how the object makes a verb transitive or intransitive. So we have here, I bounced ideas around the classroom. Now, the first thing I can do is take out around the classroom. Take out that prepositional phrase. So I just bounced ideas. There's an object, I bounced ideas, making that the direct object, making that transitive. However, I can easily take out ideas, and I bounced around the classroom. I just bounced. There is no object that I bounced, so therefore bouncing is describing me. And that would make that an intransitive verb because you don't need an object to complete that verb there. I teach students grammar during the week. We can again take out this phrase during the week. So I teach students grammar. And what do I teach? I teach grammar. To whom do I teach it? Students. Direct object, indirect object. Transitive verb. If I took out either of those things, if I took out either of grammar, suddenly I teach students. Suddenly students is the direct object. If I took out students, I teach grammar. That's a direct object with no indirect object. Or I could take them both out, cross out this, as you can see, don't need that prepositional phrase there. I teach, just sort of a statement of who I am. And that would make that an intransitive verb. So those objects clearly make this verb what it is. Now let's look at this one. When will we go to the train station? So you've got a question here. And questions are often tricky for students because the word order is quite frankly a little out of the ordinary. So the easiest way to deal with a question when you're trying to find a particular part of speech is to turn it into a statement. So we can get rid of this. We can reorder it. We will go to the train station. Now, let's get rid of that question mark. We will go to the train station. Again, if you take out this prepositional phrase, we will go. So will go is the verb. There is no object that we are going to, so that makes that intransitive verb. Pretty straightforward when you can put into a statement like that. Okay, let's do a quick recap here. So transitive, first off, equals a direct object, which is an object that gets the action, right? It's an object that gets the action. And again, we want to make sure that we remember object does not equal phrase. Does not equal a phrase. That's an R right there. Does not equal phrase. Intransitive means no object. Goodness, no object. So when you're looking at intransitive verbs, first thing you have to figure out, is this verb action or linking? If it is action, so we say action or linking. If it is action, then you have to figure out, is it transitive or intransitive? And that's going to be determined by whether or not there's an object there. So I hope it helped you out. If need be, you may want to watch the video on complements and watch the video on on action and linking verbs. Thank you very much.